This is Family Electric Ghost, and we are live on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch channels with David Parsons and the third. And we're glad to have you. He's on the island of Kaua'i, which I got right, I hope.
You got it right, man. Aloha. It's a little early on this side, but we're stoked to be on with you.
Yeah, it's a little early. It's like 5 p.m. New Hampshire time. We live in New Hampshire. A weird state for an electronic musician, I know. But we've been doing this podcasting since 2018. We've got about 32,000 listeners via our Spotify Anchor FM podcast. And we are now doing these video podcasts, which is new for us in 2021. Every podcast we do does get pushed into audio only, but the video portion is a new thing we're doing.
Sweet, man. Well, Phantom Ghost, I'm so stoked to be on with you, and the opportunity is such a pleasure. I thought it was funny. You're like, it's not New Hampshire is not the most well-known place for electric music, but you know what? Who cares, man? It's music, and music touches people in awesome ways and ends of the earth. You know, you never know who it's going to reach. So yeah. Perfect example. I'm on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, literally on the other side of the world.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a bunch of pine trees with a bunch of Moogs and Rolands and modular gear. And usually I got to go to New York for anybody to really get into it. But we want to get into what you do. And what we're first going to do is we're actually going to show, which we're queuing up, a video that you did on YouTube. You have an official lyric video for the original song, Where You Are. And we're going to actually give the audience a taste of your music. We're going to play the whole video all the way through. And then we're going to, on the back side, we'll talk to you about it. All right?
Okay. Awesome, man. Love it.
Okay, so we're going to get into the song David Parsons III, Where You Are. Thank you.
In that hammock where we lay is where we loved, is where we laughed till the morning sun. And me and you, and me and you. In that hammock where we lay is where we loved, is where we laugh till the morning sun. And me and you, and me and you, tangled in the scent of you. Is where you are, is where I want to be. And me and you, and me and you. Is where you are, is where I want to be. Me and you, me and you. La da 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 da, 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 la da 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 da. She said, I want seashells, but seashore. Don't wanna be here anymore. Take my heart in your hand. Take this love to distant lands on daisies. Just a daydream with you. Is where I want to be. Me and you, me and you. Is where you are, is where I want to be. Me and you, me and you. Cause I don't need anything but a place to lay my head. close to your chest beneath my chin, and your hair from my bed. It's where you are, is where I want to be. I'm me and you, I'm me and you. It's where you are, is where I want to be. Me and you, I'm me and you. It's where you are, is where I want to be. I'm me and you. Me and you. It's where you are, is where I want to be. Me and you. Me and you.
So that was David Parsons III and in your song Where You Are. So we're going to get that off and get back into the main topic. So yeah, we're happy. I got my green screen's off, but just the way it goes. Here we go. We're back.
Yeah, that's a nice little graphic you got there.
Yeah, it's my Moog. It's my Moog, and then my daughter did my logo there.
That's sweet.
That logo for the ghost. But yeah, we got a bunch of them she's done. But yeah, we want to get into who you are. So you are a singer-songwriter, author, and motivational speaker, and you used to be in the world of celebrity advertising in Los Angeles before you moved to Kaua'i.
Yes. Yep, that's correct. I before I moved here, before I even knew I could write music, I was had the pleasure of working with some NFL athletes and celebrities, and I was just right place at the right time when I was in college, and I used to play on the baseball team, and I was a bench warmer, so third string. They put me in charge of a bunch of the little kid training sessions, and one of the kids that I was kind of mentoring and had been training for a couple of years, his dad happened to be a kind of a hot shot in the celebrity branding world. And when I stopped playing baseball, he asked me to be a part of his team. And I just, man, talk about such a pleasure and an honor to be a part of something that, was bigger than yourself, that you got to be a part of a team. And I learned all about, just chasing after something and hard work and traveling and marketing, which I think was the foundation for when I did discover I could write music. Allowed me to excel fast because I approach music as business before the creative side. I look at it more of a, I have to run a business. I'm an entrepreneur, which allowed kind of the stepping stones for me to be successful in music with the gift.
That's a really good thing, because a lot of us, I'm probably more of a like I'm a more of like the type of like avant-garde kind of Lou Reed
yeah.
like thing going on, or like old school progressive. It's like and we need to actually do better. A lot of us indie artists are more kind of like, oh, we don't want to be big, we just want to be true to our art. And in truth, the reason I do the podcast is because it helps me with the business.
Sure.
And so, I mean, if I as a musician, I'd rather probably spend 100% of my time on my Moog, but I spend a lot of time talking to other musicians, not even talking about my own music. So that's kind of a thing that you realize you have to put time in to get other things going on.
Yes,
from that business side. So you discovered like life on the island, which must be pretty cool. And you found that you had a talent for singing after you already had the really cool talent of marketing, which I think a lot of musicians, like we said, really need that. But you were influenced by one of my favorite artists of all time, Van Morrison.
Yes, absolutely.
And maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, because Van Morrison, Van the Man, he is like such a big, pillar of all types of music. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's very interesting about me is I didn't come from a music background. I I just started picking up a guitar back in 2014 and like consistently playing. I started
Mhm.
with like 4 chords, but something I was always drawn to with my father is we listen to oldies a lot, and you know, one of the artists that we used to listen to was Van Morrison. But I love him because I love his lyrics, and I love that's for me. I love songs that have lyrics that have purpose and intentionality behind them, and um, that hit you at a point where you connect with the lyrics and not, you know, as much as you do the music and the instruments behind it. For me, I've always just been a lyrically driven uh, person and musician. So for him, you know, Into the Mystic and Tupelo Honey, like those songs
Yeah.
that are driven by acoustic sounds, um, where he creates kind of an atmosphere that you can hear in the background of the song. I think as I formed in 2014, 2015, and we as musicians, we're always changing, we're always evolving, we're always kind of pushing the limits of who we are individually and finding our identity in the music. But I think that was something that was very influential for me is, you know, Into the Mystic, when he's singing about the foghorn and you hear the foghorn out off in the
Yeah.
background. I think
Sounds like
like
it's from
living,
San Francisco Bay or something.
yeah, just living in Kauai, we have so much beautiful natural sounds around us, from the ocean to the sounds of the palm trees to, you know, I was talking with my wife and I just said, it's interesting we have uh, this curtain that's in our bedroom, and it has this squeak, like this kind of squeak to it as the canyon wind passes through our house.
Mhm.
And it reminded me so much of growing up camping and the sound of the hammock. And it was this, you know, this nostalgic sound. So I think, getting back to your question, like how he's influenced me is I think that I've been able to take the outside and the atmosphere of where I'm at in my life, and also geographically where I'm at when I'm writing a song, and bringing that into that experience. I think that's been how he
Yeah.
specifically has influenced me.
One of the things I love about Van is, you know, if you think about his music, he's got this kind of Celtic romance thing going on, and he always names checks all these great authors,
Yeah.
right? So he'll like, you know, torn down Al Rambo. He'll just name check all these things, and there's all this layering, but it's got this soul. It's like a blue eyed soul with this
Hmm.
Celtic thing going on, and then this kind of jazz progressive rock thing going on.
Yeah.
Uh, and I really got into him when he got to this point. We did hymns to the silence and enlightenment. And because I'm a keyboardist, I really because he was kind of struggling with like the new wave era and trying to figure out where he was going to fit. And
Yeah.
then he
Yeah.
got to the '90s. He figured out how to use keyboards and synths in this really interesting way. It was kind of like a Brian Eno kind of thing. It was like this very atmospheric, kind of like the way the U2 with Unforgettable Fire and Joshua Tree. They came up with this new sound, and Van came up with that new sound. And I really liked how he used the piano with like these synths that were kind of very orchestral in the background,
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
that really appealed to me. And there's a lot of work I've done that's kind of inspired by that phase of his work. But
I think what's cool is, as musicians, right, we have certain sounds that we, when we're listening to songs, right, we reach out and we can sympathize, or we hear those certain things. Like for me, when I listen to his music, I would never sit there and necessarily pick apart like the piano or the keys or something like that. But it's so interesting how that's the first thing, you know, that you hear, right? That, or that's one of those things that
yeah,
connects with you. And I remember we were talking about, I'm sorry, I'm again, my background is not necessarily music, so I feel a little bit like a hypocrite sometimes, because you know, my publisher and my manager, they're so intellectually music
yeah. Like
encyclopedias, and I'm just like,
John.
I just listen to music, you know. And like, but I think that that's one of the wonders of being a fan of music and also an
Hmm.
audience member of music, is how we all approach the listening process differently. And I remember we were talking about, Jump and the keyboards for
Oh
that were
yeah.
used in
Yeah, the
Band Aid
Oberheim.
Jump. Yeah,
There's like the big, like I'm a big keyboard head, right? So
yeah,
like I know the difference between like an OB6 or like a
right.
Prophet 5 or a Jupiter 8 or a Juno 106 or a Mini Moog Hammond B3, name checking them all. But Yamaha DX7. But it's like there's like like a Fender Strat or a Les
Yeah,
Paul or a
exactly.
Rickenbacker. It's like there's certain guitars that are associated with certain musicians. Like
Yep,
Rickenbacker is like the Byrds and Tom Petty. They
yep,
both used the Rickenbacker, and they had this very interesting 12-string sound that's associated with both of those bands. And the
sure.
same thing happens with like the keyboards. Like it's a big thing I'm into. I'm a big analog modular synth guy. But yeah, I think it's just interesting the way. But the other thing that's really interesting, I think, in music is like, well, I'm a keyboardist, but I love punk bands. I like
Sure.
the Clash. I like Husker Du. I like the Replacements. I like the Ramones. And you say,
Yeah,
well, why would you like that? Well, okay, think about Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor. There's a lot of punk in what Trent does with Nine Inch Nails. And so if he approached like the Clash and that kind of punk edge and that heavy rock, heavy metal kind of edge, like a Zeppelin edge, and put it into like electronic, you get this industrial sound. So yeah, I've always been a big fan of like merging genres,
sure.
because I think that's where you get something new, and that's why I like talking to people in the indie world. And
Right.
interesting, when we talk about your influences, we have Van Morrison's really big. We got Jack Johnson and John Mayer, and I can see that when you're more of a singer-songwriter type. You got that standard singer-songwriter kind of like platform that's really big in the 70s.
Sure.
I guess John Mayer and Jack Johnson have kind of continued it now. But we're kind of in the era of the DJ or the EDM and the hip hop band. So it's interesting that you kind of picked the singer-songwriter vibe, which is more like a 70s, late 60s vibe.
Yeah, and it's neat how I think, again, going back to the idea of being an independent artist, right, is finding who you are in the midst of that. And I would say, like, it's something that's very intimidating when you hear the Post Malones or Billie Eilish, and they have a specific pop sound. And I would say one thing that I've learned is to never leave your roots, but to always
Mm-hmm.
like lean on those, but not to try to be somebody that you're not, and not to and to be okay with that, to be unapologetically okay with being, hey, this is my vibe, this is who I am, and finding your space and finding your identity in that, and then pressing forward. Because if you go outside of that, there's nothing wrong with it, but I think that it's a little bit harder to be confident in who you are on a day-to-day basis as an indie artist when you're always trying new things, when you're always
Yeah. There's only
trying
so
to be
many
somebody
people.
that you're not,
I think there's only so many people who can be like a David Bowie. I think David
Sure,
Bowie was
sure.
like the kind of break the rule guy for that. Because
A
like
lot of
he was.
courage.
Yeah, but the thing about him is like, he did try it straight. Like the history with Bowie is he came out as David Jones, which is like his real name,
Mhm.
and he wore like a Beatle-esque like suit, and he tried to do stuff kind of straight. He did this sing pop songs, sing Beatle-esque type songs. It didn't go anywhere. And then
Right.
as soon as he became like did Space Oddity, and it came out with this kind of Ziggy-esque vibe, he
Yeah.
started bringing theater. And then he started not only doing that, it's like every album had a different character, from a
Yeah.
Ziggy Stardust to Aladdin Sane to the Thin White Duke to like, all these different characters you create. And that I think there's a whole thing in the 70s where tons of bands, like even Queen had a phase where they were kind of doing that kind of Bowie-esque thing.
Sure.
A lot of progressive rock bands did it. Kiss did it. A lot of like Rat, Poison, they all kind of took the idea. And a lot of the new wave bands are all like sons and daughters of Bowie. It's just interesting that people have to know where their head's at. Do you want to be into that theater? Some people would rather be like a James Taylor. It seems like you got the James Taylor, Van Morrison kind. They never, Van never tried to be like Freddie Mercury. He never tried to come out looking like anybody other than himself.
And
And
I
some,
think that there's absolute like value to the people that can do that. I mean, I think that takes a lot of courage. I mean, Lady Gaga, you know what I mean? Like
yeah, she's a modern version of that.
a modern version where she just incredible piano player, really high IQ, but she looked at it and she said, "Well, I'm the stature of where I want to get to. I don't want, I don't necessarily think that just sitting there playing piano is
Well, she
gonna do
tried
it
it in
for
New
me."
York and it didn't
Yeah, she
work.
did. Absolutely. And then, and then you start putting on the big costumes and there's this ultra ego to it. And I think for me, I just look at that and I go, that that's scary to me
To
to
do that, to
feel
turn into the character.
to jump into that. But the thing is it pays off if you can do it, and
Yeah, it's a
to be
lot of
able to step
theatrics.
into it. Yeah, sure. And
I
I've
think you
just
gotta
always
have
wanted.
yeah. I mean, I
Go
think
ahead.
it's the difference between being a musician, right, and
Yeah,
being a performer.
sure, absolutely.
Like if you think about like the Michael Jacksons and the Princes, like in the '80s, um, they had a lot of performer in them, a lot of actor in them.
Hmm.
And I think in order to get to that kind of stature, like the Lady Gaga, Queen, Prince, Michael Jackson, Bowie thing, you got to kind of create this stagecraft, and it's not you; it's this other you. And
Yes.
you have to be comfortable projecting that. And sometimes there was a problem where people would live that role.
Yes.
Bowie admitted that he sometimes like became Ziggy and he couldn't get out of Ziggy.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes that's a big problem because if you can't get out of that character, it's like a method actor. You see an Al Pacino or De Niro, they get stuck in the character, and that can be detrimental to your life. So I can understand why some musicians say, "Well, I don't want to even go there."
Sure.
you know,
Yeah. I mean, I've thought about it. My wife I've kicked around ideas like that with my wife and stuff, but I think I always come back to, as much as I would like to be known as a performer, I want to be known as an artist and a lyricist and
Mhm.
somebody that writes music that comes from a place of just kind of everyday life, and that's who I am. And there's nothing wrong with the other one by any means. I mean, that
No,
would be
it's all
super
there's a place for everything.
yeah, there's a place that's just not me at this point in time in my life.
You just never know where you go. If
Sure.
you as a you could become an actor. Like you could
Yeah.
like musicians sometimes find themselves some director comes up to you and says, "Yeah, hey," they see you on a video and then they say, "Hey, I think you could play this role."
Yeah.
Right. And then suddenly you go and play something you never thought you could do, right? Because the director pulls it out of you. So you never know where you're going to go if something like that happens. But what I think it's interesting, like I say, in this kind of age where we don't really have the singer songwriter as much, I do focus in this program talking to singer songwriters because I like the depth of what a singer songwriter can do. I like the fact that it's like it's telling a story or reading a novel. In the same way that you like Van Morrison, I get drawn into people who, when I try to interview people, I want to understand like where they're coming from and why they want to write songs that tell stories,
Mhm.
rather than just beat focused songs. Not that that's bad, but I'm more of a child of the 70s and 60s. I grew up with the Beatles. I grew up with the Stones. I grew up
Yeah.
with songs in albums. I actually am not a playlist person. I'm more of an album focused person.
Mm.
And I think
That's how
this,
my brother is. My brother is like, he will not listen to my youngest brother, Jacob. He's like, he will not listen to an individual song. He's like, dude, that is not how you listen to music. You start at the beginning of the album and you
yeah,
work through it so that you feel and experience what the artist was creating at that season in his life or that snapshot in his life. I find it very interesting on that note with the song Where You Are that you played, right? That was one of my very first songs that I kind of came out with and wrote. Um, and the inspiration behind that is my auntie Linda. She passed away from breast cancer about 11 years ago, 12 years ago. And she's just this vibrant, beautiful, one of those people that when they walk into a room, they just light the whole room up and always has a smile and brings this sense of peace, right? And my uncle Robert, her husband, about a year or two after she passed away, we were sitting there, and it was Christmas Eve, and we've done the family big get together, and I saw this photo of my auntie Linda and my uncle Robert up on the mantle, and it was one of their last trips to I believe it was Maui, one of the other Hawaiian Islands, and at this point in her life, we knew that it was terminal and all that stuff. And I just said, Uncle Robert, what do you miss most about Auntie Linda? And he said, right out of his mouth, he said, wherever Auntie Linda was is where I wanted to be. And that's where that song "Where You Are" came from, the lyrics of that. So I think for me, everybody's process is different, but I'll hear these things in everyday life that I'm like, that right there, that's
the song.
And you go throughout, you go throughout your every single day, and the ebb and flow of life, and you hear these things. When my executive assistant, Jordan, when I first met him, something that stood out to me is he said, he would say, treat yourself good, treat yourself today. And I was like, that right there, that's the essence.
There's another song. There's another song. Yeah.
So
I think I think that is a really core thing. I think as singer-songwriters, I think creative people, as the talent, like whether you're a musician, right, and you figure out, like as a like an instrument, when you play your instrument, you kind of, we'll get into this, but like all your influences when you're playing an instrument kind of subconsciously come out.
Yeah.
And lyrics is a whole nother thing. You kind of subconsciously or consciously make decisions. Like you heard that story, and then you turned it into what your kind of sound painting, your sound movie, your sound little vision.
Yeah, and then the whole, the song, it all kind of comes together. I was thinking like, okay, well, what's a scene, and what is somebody thinking when they're in that place in life where they know they have a limited amount of time, and how can I think about this from somebody else's perspective? In this case, being my uncle, and that's why the whole song starts out with in that hammock, where we just we woke up to the sunrise and stuff, and then it goes on to say. That talks about the kind of the simpler things of life, and how if I was in that position of, hey, you have X amount of months left to live, where would you want to be? And I was like, well, I would want to be somewhere that has sunshine and rainbows and butterflies, all that good stuff, and kind of end it that way. But yeah,
with a positive kind of vision on something that you could go kind of dark on, and you went to the light, which is, I think that's the talent of singer-songwriters. I mean, sometimes, like I'm a big fan of Lou Reed and his kind of delving into New York darkness. Okay. Because I kind of like the kind of dark corners of the street, like Graham Parsons used to actually talk about that in his work. But yeah, it's just, and even like Johnny Cash would kind of focus on like criminals as like the heroes in his songs. and it's like, okay, well, that's cool, but it's also good to have the kind of happy power that you get in a Motown song, or you get into something with a cool beat and talking about romance. And it's always like a weird dichotomy. Like, can you create like this very happy beat, but maybe have lyrics that are a little bit more depressive, but the beat is so powerful that people don't actually see that the song is actually sad. Yeah. If you actually read the lyrics, it's sad, but the feeling the song conveys is happy.
Exact opposite.
Yeah, I actually like that dichotomy. I'm kind of into that. But.
I like that too when in movies, right, where I can't name exact one right now, but every once in a while I'll see this play out in movies or in a TV show where it's some like horrific scene of somebody dying or some whatever, and then it's like it's this weird like happy just solo song. Sometimes it'll be like a cappella with just with like a guitar or like a bass.
Yeah, Quentin Tarantino's famous for putting songs like that into like really crazy scenes.
Yeah, I think that's actually where I was
like Reservoir Dogs has this really like I think this really famous song. I forget the name of it, but it's like there's this famous scene where this guy goes and does all this horrific things, but it's got this kind of folky song that's kind of upbeat while he's doing it. And Tarantino is famous for taking like songs and putting kind of really creepy imagery around them. And they got the dichotomy, but yeah, diverge. But I think it's interesting. We know your influences, and we know that you had, you came from a different background from most musicians, that they probably would like to have your skill set. but you started to,
and I'd like to have their creativity. Just throwing that out there.
well, you do have it because you're doing your own work. So you found a voice, you found your voice,
Sure.
and like you started like based on what I'm reading your background, like you performed in the restaurants and hotels and on that you actually have a lot of cool venues like you would in LA because you're like in a tourist area. So is that maybe talk about how you were able to go from one type of a career into this other career, because it's one thing to be like somebody that wants to do that, but like how did you get yourself into that performing mode, which is totally different than what you had done before in your life?
Yeah, I think with working with the celebrities and stuff, I had to probably when I was like 18, 19, I had to be in positions where I had to sell our websites or like our design, because we created websites, right, for NFL guys. So it was my job next to the CEOs to go into these situations where agents would be or publicists for teams would be, or the actual, players and athletes themselves. And basically from scratch have to, in a very quick elevator pitch, sell them on an idea and the values of that. So I think for me getting into music as a full-time artist, I had this drive to say, I don't care if people don't like what I have to play. There's going to be somebody out there that likes it. And I'm not the greatest. I'll be the first to tell you, I'm certainly not, John Mayer or Jack Johnson by any means. There's always going to be that's better than you. But for me, I had this internal drive that I'm going to throw myself into situations where I am super uncomfortable because I love this so much. And I think, my kind of start, the very first gig that I ever had was it's actually right down the street from my studio. It was at a small, little steakhouse called Wranglers on the west side of Kaua'i. In fact, I think it's the furthest most west side steakhouse in the United States. But super small, amazing staff, just Marissa and her team. And the story goes, I mean, this is how I got started. Is one of my really good friends, his wife, and him let me rent a room out here in Kaua'i, and he's the guy that plays ukulele on all of my tracks that have ukulele on them. And this guy just loves playing. He just absolutely loves playing music. And so 3-4 nights a week, his name's Mitch. Mitch would get his ukulele out and just strum Folsom Prison and go down the list of 10, 20 different songs. And he's like, Dave, you got to play music with me. And I'm like, I brought my guitar, but I know this was 2013. Like, I know 3 chords. And so we started playing, and then they ran a little bed and breakfast. And so we started playing 2-3 nights very consistently for 5, 6, 7, 8 guests that would come into the lobby area, his family, the family room and stuff. And they started asking us, hey, do you have a CD? Do you have a CD? And at first I'm like, we sound so bad. Why would you want a CD?
Yeah.
And then about 6 months into it, my marketing brain kicked in, and it was like, wait, if there's strangers from across the world consistently asking you for a CD, maybe there's something more to this vibe. Maybe there's something to this. And so I had a Friday night. So I went from CEO of the marketing company to when I hit the island, I wanted a fresh restart. And that's a lot about what I talk about when I get to speak to students at, business schools and music schools. Is I needed a restart. And I wanted to do that in my mid-20s before I settled down and found a wife and, started having kids. And when I came to the island, I had like I said, I knew 4 chords, and all I wanted to do is go from 12-hour days, 6 days a week in marketing to being the kid I never got to be through my college years. And so I was a busser. I was a busser at a restaurant and a server here on Kaua'i. And I just, took the time to learn how to surf. I took the time to start playing guitar and do these sessions with Mitch. And I think it all started, I had one night off. It was a Friday night, and I went down to this street fair that was every Friday, about 15 minutes from my house. And there were street performers. You could go pick a light, a street light to sit underneath and play. So I did that. I went down. I think I knew literally 8 songs from playing with Mitch in his family room for these guests. I knew about 8 songs by heart by that time. I was so nervous, Phantom. I closed my eyes. I started playing the 8 songs I knew. I'd peek, under every once in a while to make sure my chords were right. And
are they still there? The crowd there?
And I opened my eyes, and there was about 13 people there, and I remember there was $48 in cash, and that was the moment I said, "This is what I'm doing for the rest of my life." And on the ride home, I was on such a high from making the tips that I pulled over to that steakhouse. I walked right in. And again, this is the salesman in me, the marketer in me. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not by any means ready to be a performer for a travel destination restaurant. But I went right up to the counter and I said, "Hey, do you guys ever need live music?" And the lady that was at the counter, she said to me, "David, did anybody tell you about this? We talked about this today, this afternoon, in our managers meeting about bringing on live music in our restaurant." Wow. And she said, "Can you stay here?" And she went back and got Marissa, who is the assistant general manager. And she said, "Hey, can you play for 2 hours?" I said, "Yes, absolutely," which I didn't have a set list at all for that space in time. She's like, "How much do you want to get paid?" I was like, $150 for 2 hours. And she's like, "Great, we'll see you next Friday." I was like, "Great, you'll see me next Friday." And so then, for a solid 6 to 9 months, it was just forcing myself to get as many of those gigs as I could. And literally Phantom Ghost, I would get on stage, I'd be 2-3 songs in, and I'd be sweating so much because I was so nervous. And I remember looking down at my sheet music and going, "Why am I doing this to myself? I hate this. I don't enjoy this." And fast forward now, making that transition to playing in front of a lot of people and being completely comfortable and being able to focus on, being more of an entertainer rather than a sweating musician being scared.
Well, I think it's it's weird when you start later as a musician, because a lot of us, I started when I was 13, 14 years old.
Yeah, that's what you're
creating bands in the basement, punk bands and garage bands, kind of the original garage band, basement bands, and going to house parties and trying to get playing at pizza joints, and just the kind of working musician thing that we all tend to do. But different people, I've talked to other artists like yourself that started later. They started in their late 20s or their 30s or their 40s, and it's a lot of times it's really the passion. And most of the time, the reason I talk to indie artists is because most independent artists, they're not actually trying to make money initially. They're doing it because there's something inside themselves they want to do. They want to say something. They have something inside that they want to express. And usually what happens is if you're dedicated enough, you will find people that want to hear that. They want to hear what you have to say or sing or present. And then your talent to be, a pusher. I think to push yourself is a lot of musicians will try to do it at different levels. It's just a matter of, when I've read in your background, that you were able to kind of take your marketing skill and be able to get your stuff into other forms that, MSNBC and Comcast. And we'll talk about how you were able to get, translate that into different, a different level of stuff.
And I think also too, realizing that there's so many amazing people along the way that this is I'm so grateful to my team and my family and my wife who's supportive of this and that sees the value in it. And I would never have gotten here without that team, that tribe around me. There's just, we have a funny in our band. We have this funny, but whenever we get complimented off stage is this awkward moment where the bass player, because he's a really, really amazing bass player, and he'll look at me and he goes, "Nah, it's all Dave." And then I'll look at our ukulele player, it's "Nah, it's all Mitch." It's effective because we realize that there's absolutely zero space to be anything but humble in this, because every one of us has come together to be a part of this and plays an active role. I could never have been here if Mitch Milan and his wife weren't gracious enough to let me move into their house and rent, the loft space. I would never have discovered music if Mitch didn't say, get your guitar out and play and sing.
Yeah,
Whether
it's
or
all
not you
those
sound
people,
good or not, you can sing,
It's all the
And
people
so,
along the way, I think, as a musician that, a lot of times it seems to be fate or these lucky breaks, or you just happen to, but it's really like you have to put yourself out of the 9 to 5 thing. You have to take a risk. I mean, every musician, a lot of times, whether they get supported, a lot of musicians end up having a situation where like their parents, they're really not into music. They're like, you're not going to make any money. You're not going to go get a real job. Right. And so a lot of times musicians have to kind of buck against, like, their parents aren't supportive. Their best friends might not be supportive. They end up finding a different community of other musicians or people who are into supporting musicians and find a different world to kind of phase into that. And it seems like, it's hard because a lot of times there's a lot of people in the world that don't seem to understand that music is in everything. I mean, it's in movies, it's in TV shows, it's in video games, it's like everywhere. So when people say you can't make money, they just don't fully understand how deep music is. I mean, it's in everything that's out there. So if you tap into that, you can actually make money.
Yeah, and I also think that it's it's building, for me, it's having been willing to do the crap stuff. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've played at restaurants and there's 2 or 3 people there, and I make $100 or $50, and there's zero praise in it. And you have to come to terms with that, and you have to still treat that session or that concert or that performance as if those 2 people that are sitting there are the owners of Capitol Records, and it's having the same passion for. And I'm not the best. I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, there's some nights where I'm just exhausted, and I don't have, I'm not on my A game. But what I guess my advice would be is, if you want to be a successful musician, I think there's two parts to it. One is not waiting for inspiration to happen. I hear that all the time is, oh, I don't feel inspired. And so I'm it's been a long time since I've been, felt inspired. And it's like, no, you show up and you create your own inspiration. You have to show up. You have to bring it every single day. You have to be willing to sit down and start writing and realize. I tell my team all the time, like, hey, there's going to probably be 200 really, really bad songs that I write. But in that process, I'm going to make little incremental improvements. And
I think that's a core thing, because like I'm a crazy, like, prolific type of like writer. I pretty much
really are. You really are.
I write, like, I got like maybe 1,500, 2,000 compositions I've been working on. And it's like I have my studio in my bedroom. So pretty much if I wake up, I just go and start working, right? And so it's like everything is like right next to me. I'm like original bedroom producer. So so the whole idea is like I do so many hours worth of music. And people say, well, why are you doing that? I say, well, because what I find is if I just record, right? If I just go and I record and I just then I go back and I listen to it, I find things that I work on. If I give myself all this reference material, just like my latest thing that I do since COVID, right? Since I can't go out in New Hampshire, we can't play venues. Most of the Northeast, we can't play venues. So I do these live concerts from my studio, and then I record them. And then I find that in those live concerts, what happens is instead of just doing a recording session and then start and stop, I force myself to go live because it makes me do improvisation, and it makes you can't just stop because you're playing live. So then you kind of let the music go wherever it's going to go. And I find that actually gives me a lot of raw material that I can use for weeks and weeks and pull out the things I didn't even know I was going to do. And that's why I find would tell people, like, kind of old school, what bands used to do back in the 60s and 70s before, the DAW, is they would just go in and jam. The Stones would just go in and jam. The Allmans would just go in and jam. Eric Clapton would just go in the studio and jam. And there's a lot of good in that. I mean, not everybody had the money to do that, but you could take your DAW and just jam instead of trying to grid life. And you'll find that sometimes when you're a little bit looser with yourself, you can come up with a lot of good material.
I think, man, for listeners, I think that is a huge nugget that you just gave, is finding your process. Going back to what I was saying before, is like creating inspiration. I think that probably some of my most successful songs on TV and stuff have, or ones that have gotten placement on radio and stuff, have been from those sessions where literally nobody's in the mall and people are walking by and I have my set list, but my Mitch is playing ukulele and Seth's on bass, and we have some time at the end to just jam. And what comes from those moments of pure, innocent, sometimes pure crap, like you find something in the riff, you find something and you find a groove, and it's like, wow,
that's kind of the history of modern music. Is so many bands end up recording something they didn't even know they were going to do. Right? They just ran the tape in the old school recording studios. They just run the tape, and even like a lot of bands would go on the road. Like YouTube did a bunch of albums from just taping stuff on the road. And that's a normal technique that a lot of bands do when they kind of like, well, the studio is not working, right? So then they go on the road and they just make sure they tape the whole concerts. And then they end up finding that, through the concerts, they just kind of, it's a lot of times music to me, it's like a muse thing. It's like a poet. Poets kind of pull stuff from the muse, right? You pull it from the ether, you get it out of the air. And so when you're with a bunch of creative people, you're with a drummer, a bass player, guitar player, somebody on a mandolin, whatever. It's that nature of playing together as a musician. You go to New Orleans, you can see it. You go to the Delta with the blues guys, you see it. That is the process. That is really how things happen. It's very hard to kind of just go on the grid and say, I'm going to make a hit. No, there's some guys that can do it. They're very good at it.
Yeah, I think that there is a pop format, if you will.
Yeah, there's a certain type of producer that can do that. But I think a lot of people, actually, it's the happy accident that really does it.
Yeah, perfect example. Probably the song I'm most well known for, like on the islands, "Life Is Jelly," right? That funny story. The story behind that song is my car broke down, and for some reason in Hawaii, it's the hardest thing to get a tow truck driver on time. It just doesn't happen. So I think I was waiting for 6 hours, and I had.
So that sounds like Hawaiian time.
Yeah, Hawaiian time. Exactly. And
it's like, I'll get there when I get there. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, and I found a little riff. I was like, well, that's cool. And then on the way home, when I finally got the car to get jump started, or where, I can't remember what happened, but I pulled into a guitar store. I put my little phone out, and I just started recording the thing. And it.
Yeah, a lot of people today, they just use their voice memo.
That's what I use.
They use GarageBand. And just you can do a lot. I mean, back in the day when I didn't have my big Rolands, I used to use a cheap Casio and a Fostex and a Tascam, right? And just lay stuff down. And people would say, well, what's that? I said, well, you'd be surprised how many hip hop songs were on a Casio. You'd be surprised how many songs were like, Jack White was using like $100 plastic guitar. He didn't care. It really doesn't matter. It's really the inspiration of what you're doing.
And I think it's the quality of the song, right? In the marketing world, we used to say content is king. I got to work with a bunch of like A-list business bloggers on one of the projects I worked on, and my mind was blown. I would go to these websites, and it would literally be a white screen with text, like typewriter text, and yet they had 3, 4, 5 million followers because the content that they produced was so valuable to the people that was reading it. It was filled with such nuggets, and I think that. It doesn't matter if you record on $1 million stuff or if you record on a voice memo and you release that. I think what I've learned is it really comes down to, can the song convey a message in a way that turns people's heads? And if it can, it doesn't matter. It's a bit of pulling the heartstrings.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of. If you think about it, if you go back and you listen to stuff like on vinyl from the 20s and the 30s, the quality is not that great, but the content's like unbelievable, right?
Yeah, it's
You go listen to like the original like stuff on like if you listen to like James Brown stuff with the Furious Flames, and Famous Flames, and they didn't have sometimes the best recording equipment on some of the Chess Record stuff, or the early soul stuff and blues stuff, but it's just the heart. And that's what I tell people, that's why I think what happened with Kurt Cobain, right? When Nirvana, because you came out of an age where you had all this glitz with like heavy metal and MTV, and everything was like highly produced. And then Kurt kind of came back with this kind of punk aesthetic and this honesty. But it wasn't just punk. He had like a Beatle-esque thing too. He could write, and he had a really good voice. And so he was able to come back and say, hey, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to do something that's like raw power with honesty, and that's going to pull at people's heartstrings. And it did, because you don't always have to be pitch perfect.
And I think that's what goes back to what we were saying at the very beginning of this whole segment, was be honest and be raw with who you are as an individual.
Yeah.
And find that place and real, man, I'll be the first to tell you, I get, as an independent artist steering the ship, I get super nervous and scared and intimidated by what I'm up against. But I'm constantly reminded by my team and my mentors that, and then I have to do it. I have to self-check those thoughts and remind myself that it's not about how good I am compared to, John Mayer or Jack Johnson. I just need to focus on every day me making those small incremental things and being raw with my music. Because if I am, I know that if I can captivate a small restaurant, my old drummer Rico, we would play these gigs and he'd come up, he's like, dude, did you see table 6? And did you see they're bouncing up and down and people are gonna love you? And it's like, man, Rico would always remind me that if you can captivate people in a small space, there's enough people out there that will pay attention. And it's about finding those authentic people that love what you have and being true to it.
Well, I think that's a thing why I always tell musicians, like I grew up with a bunch of guys right in my basement bands, and they're like all trying to be Jimmy Page, or they're trying to be Mick Jones, or they're trying to be, Keith Richards, right? And then they would get disappointed, and they get to a point where it's like, I'm never going to be Keith. I'm not going to be Jimmy. I'm not going to be Hendrix. So I'm going to give it up. And I used to tell people, it's like, look at the Ramones, right? They never tried to be like Eric. Yeah. They never tried to be like Hendrix. They got to be really good within the Ramones way of doing it. Or even Lou Reed. Lou Reed never had a pitch perfect voice. He did spoken word. And he never tried to I'm going to get my singing voice perfect. He basically understood he's a poet. He's a spoken word artist. He would play very lo-fi stuff. It was never going to match the Stones. It was never going to match the Who. It was never going to match the Beatles. But the Velvets became this Velvet Underground became this whole iconic thing for a lot of alternative indie bands, even today. If you just believe in what you're doing, and you might not have a pitch perfect voice, you might not even be tone deaf or whatever, but if you believe what you're doing, that people will feel that belief and follow you.
Yes,
absolutely. And that's the core. You don't have to be the best at everything other than maybe be at the best at being you.
Yeah. And to be okay with that, to be okay with the fact that look, I knew when I got on stage at the beginning, I knew that I was going to make some really bad mistakes. I remember one time a lady came up to me with $100 bill and she's like, can you play this song? And I said, probably not, but I'm going to give it my try. Right?
Try it.
She gives me the $100. She goes, sits back down. I absolutely butcher it. I mean, as bad as it gets. And I stopped in the middle of it and I said, I don't remember her name, Christy or something. I said, Christy,
give it back.
I need you to take this back. I'm going to try it. But you have to be that, you got to be okay with that is learning.
I think every musician, when you pick up that guitar, when you first do it, you know you're not going to be Jimmy Page unless you're just born that way, right? So
Right.
you know you're not going to be able to do it, right? But the whole point is it's the process. It's the process. Like you never can get anywhere if you have the fear. Like the fear is what stops everybody, you know. And the whole idea with music is like a lot of times like I'm getting into jazz. Like in jazz is very difficult. It's difficult. It's just as hard to do as classical music, and it's like there's an art form to it. And they're like, you know, they're jazz purists, right? You play with some jazz guys. Like if you can't hang with their capability, they're like, oh, you get out of here, right?
Get out.
But you got to be able to like, okay, you know, you got to be able to roll off a mistake and figure out how to go with it. And that's the core, like in jazz, is like you can hang with the big dogs if you learn how to deal with if you hit the wrong key or going the wrong way, but you do something interesting, and then the guy say, wow, I didn't think you could save that or fix that. And it's really not being scared and kind of just being comfortable. And it's like as you get older and more experienced as a musician, you realize that you have to push yourself, you know, to kind of go in those ways and not be scared of it.
And that reminds me of something that when I was working in the restaurant industry, I remember one of the managers told me, you know, you can always write the ending of the story. And like you as the server have control of the experience. There are going to be times where the kitchen messes up, you know, the busser doesn't come bus in time, but you can still roll with the punches. And at the end of the day, you write the story. And I think that's something that learning your notes and learning to just roll with the mistake on stage when you have 5,000-10,000 people watching you.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was playing the cover song "Don't Worry, Be Happy," and I played this a million times or thousands of times, right? Literally in the last 8 years or something. And I get on stage. It's at a fireworks concert on a U.S. Navy base, and I think there was 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people that were there. Never ever had an issue with this, playing along, everybody. And then I get to the whistling part and I realize I'm completely cotton-mouthed. I go to whistle and it's
you can't do it.
It's that, right? For 15 seconds every time the whistling thing comes up. And it's learning to just kick back and go, well,
how am I going to play off of that? Yeah, you play off what you can play off. Like you never know. It's like when you have like analog synths like me, they sometimes don't do what you want them to do.
Sure.
And so you could have like something you want to do, and then the sound is not what you wanted, right? So then you're gonna are you gonna obsess that you don't have the exact sound that you had when you wrote it, or kind of play off of it? It's kind of like not being able to whistle. Like if you can't bring that tone up, then it's not gonna sound like what you wrote. So then you have to kind of let it go and say, I'll go somewhere else, right? Because
and sometimes that's what the inspiration is to start the whole new thing, you know. It ends up being better than it was the first time.
Because it's like I can't do what this iconic line, you know, and it's not going to work because the tone's not there. It's not doing it. So I'll have to do something else. And then I think that's what a lot of times artists, or like you forget the lyrics, but then you don't say, well, I forgot the lyrics. You just come up with, like Dylan was famous for having multiple versions of his songs, right? So he would go and do a version of like Idiot Wind or Tangled Up in Blue. And I've got all these like bootlegs of the different versions.
Nice.
And I have all these live concerts where Dylan would take like version number 1 and then version 4 or version 3. And every night he'd run the different story, because each of these songs is actually a big story. And he'd use a different character for a whole section, do a different whole section of the song. And I thought that was cool. And I think he probably did it because he was bored of just doing it the same way. And he would just, okay, fine, I'm going to run this alternate version because, like, you know, I own it. I wrote them. I wrote all these versions. I'm just going to do it. And I'm not going to be so tied to like doing it exactly the same every night, which I think is kind of cool.
And it's cool too, because then it gives your audience something that I was there at that concert when he sang it this way, you know, and
he did an alternate version.
The same
versus like the Eagles finding the band if they don't play Hotel California exactly the same way every night.
Yeah, I remember hearing that was one of the reasons that they like broke up, is because I'm drawing a blank on which song
Well,
exactly.
I think Glenn Fry and Don Henley used to find members of the band when they did like big tours if they could not play the song exactly as the radio edit.
Yeah, and there's
I
there's
can
a value
understand
to that, but at the same time, I think when you become so confined, that that's something that I think too that has been very interesting. I've had a lot of friends study music through college, grew up in the music scene, and I got this question a couple weeks ago from a student, like, how do you know what the balance is between music theory and passion? And for me, I never came from the music theory.
You go for the passion.
I wish I did. I wish I did, in the sense that I wish I knew how certain chords played with each other, but I don't know how to do scales. I'm good at chords, and I'm semi decent at writing melodies and some lyrics. So you got to play to that. But I think one thing that's important as you're breaking into thinking whether or not, hey, do I want to be an independent artist, or do I want to do music as a hobby, or do I want to go, as a label, is never letting the theory of music and the technicalities of music keep you from doing music, or just being okay with it being not to some rigid structure. I've seen probably 3 to 5 musicians that are close friends of mine that aren't even in the music industry anymore, because I personally feel like they lost the passion in the technicality of music. And I don't think that that's why we have music, or why.
I think a lot of it is just like virtuosity can be in different levels. Like you can be somebody who can sight read, sheet read, no theory, or you could be, like a band like I love is like Sun Ra, this experimental jazz band, and they just it was experimentation, and it's like taking discordant ideas and running with them, and taking all kinds of weird spoken word poetry and integrating it into bebop and fusion and free jazz, and fusion and free jazz are just very improvisational, and people they might have I don't know, like they might take a theme from a TV show. They might take a theme from a movie and then run it into the song. And then, that's the thing about jazz. You'll take something out of the ether, and then you'll kind of play with it and then bring it back and change it and invert it. And it's kind of like, it's just this game. You keep on playing these games with these, I can take this tone and kind of play with it and move it around. But I think that to me is what's fun. It's not the fun of I'm going to play it the same way every night, like Bach or Beethoven. Yeah. I'm going to reinvent it all the time because of the way I feel. Like tonight I feel a certain way, I'm going to play it that way. And it's more like a blues thing, or a punk thing, where it's the punk aesthetic or the blues feeling that makes you want to listen to Lead Belly, Robert Johnson, or any of the great bluesmen. Because it's they could approach that same structure, but every night, if they're pissed off about their girlfriend left them and stole all their money and wrecked their car, then they're gonna go do something different than they did before. Versus when she loved them that night, and so it's a different experience. It's she ran away or she loved me. It's okay, which one's gonna be tonight?
And I think that to answer the question, it's for me, and again, this is just me. I'm nobody in the grand scheme of iconic music legends, but my personal approach is not to get caught up in the theory, but to know enough chords, to know enough to be able to blend that with a melody and a structure that works, and lyrics that fit that, and then let the rest go.
That's when what you can do. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of bands that know 3 or 4 chords, right? Mm-hmm. And that's their whole stick. That's their whole thing.
AC/DC, baby.
Yeah. I mean, you get to the Ramones and AC/DC, you get to the Sex Pistols.
They did more than that. But
But I mean, I'm saying there's a kind of structure, a certain type of music that's kind of tight with where the range it can go. And it's more the attitude. Like if you come into that kind of Ramones attitude, or like a Sex Pistol attitude, or a heavy grunge band, that you can get into this kind of phase where it's more of the aesthetic and the feeling that you are trying to rebel. And in the whole idea with punk is it was rebelling against progressive rockers and like the perfect rockers. It was rebelling against guys like Jimmy Page, guys like Eric Clapton, that were like so beyond anybody else that they's like, okay, the price of admission to be a rock star is I got to be as good as Eric Clapton, right? Yeah. So there's no way I'm ever going to be as good as Eric Clapton. So how am I ever going to do it, right? So then punk gave you the answer is like, you could be Joe Strummer, you could be Mick Jones, you could be, Johnny Rotten, you could come out there, you could be Joey Ramone, you could be the Talking Heads, you could come out there and do something that's like, that's not what the old guys were doing, but it became a new way of doing it. So that in itself becomes like the new art, because you are willing to put, if you think about the Talking Heads, I mean, that is so progressive and so odd what they did, but it was like nobody else was even doing it. And they don't even do it today. It's like, it was a very unique band, very different take on like punk and progressive and art. And so if you come in there and David Byrne, you come in there and you come up with this different idea and you're willing to put yourself out there and believe in it, then you can become like the next icon because people are like, wow, he believes it. Yeah. So then they believe it.
Absolutely. Sure.
Well, I think we kind of went to, we always end up finding out that we go longer than we think we could.
That's okay.
That's the nature. But we have people come on multiple times because the cool thing about music is, we have a set idea what we should talk about, but I like to go like my music. It's like wherever the conversation is going to go, that's where we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's great having you on, David. And this, like I said, this is gonna be on my YouTube channel. It's on now. It's gonna be permanently there on Facebook and my Twitch. Awesome. We're gonna convert it over to iTunes or Apple Podcast and Spotify within an hour. We'll send you the links to that. We actually are on 11 podcast platforms that are audio only, and all of them will convert within the next day or two. Apple and Spotify will happen within an hour or two. And so we will send you that. And if you ever want to come on the show again, when you want to push a project, we have people coming on. We are working on an online festival with most of the guests, a lot of the guests we've talked to. We've got maybe 5 to 10 bands signing up for like a July, August type of online festival that we want to do. So yeah, it's just something we can get in touch with you with, but it's something we're doing. We're just inviting everybody we ever talk to.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I would love to be a part of that. And new projects wise, so I do things a little bit different. Like as an indie artist, we kind of talked about this before, but I don't necessarily do albums. I just try to come out with one song a month. Yeah, one song a month, and then license that off. And then I've had different companies come to me and say, hey, can we combine these three and make a
so if you have an EP or something, if you want to do an EP, like because I know a lot of times today people have been doing a spotlight single. I do that, and then I do albums or EPs. Yeah. But if there's ever like an EP you want to push or something like that, or even if it's a single song but it's really big for you, we've had episodes where it's just one big song that is big for you, and it's going to be pushed out like so heavy that you want to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, the new one, I got one that drops on Friday, and it's called No Regrets. Yeah, it's called No Regrets. It's
well, send us the link and we can always kind of back it into this episode.
Perfect. Yeah.
That's something we can do because we actually can go, all these episodes will have hyperlinks.
Okay.
And so like when that comes out, let us know and we'll just update, and it will actually cascade through all the audio podcast, and we can manually put it into the video ones.
That's awesome, man. That sounds sweet.
Well, we got to push each other, we're all our own.
Come on.
Well, I think the thing is like everybody has to create their own collective. The reason indie artists do well today is because we kind of create our own collective, pushing each other, and I think that's the best thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Phantom, I'm so inspired by, like you said, your prolificness. I get on in the morning. I'm like, gosh, this guy came out with like 10 new videos overnight. Like, how does he do this? And I'm very interested on you know, when we get to talk again, just getting in your mind. And I know I've read some back stuff, and we've talked about your relationship with music since you were, you know, a kid, and how you've come so far and never gave up and kept, you know, pushing. And so I just encourage people to check out those, you know, those videos and stuff for you too as well. And I so appreciate the opportunity to be able to learn from you and talk with you. And
Yeah. Well, I'm always down for the collaboration. I'm actually working with a guy, a Dutch producer right now. We're working on some cool stuff. And I work with people from time to time. I work with a Canadian poet this year. I'm working with this Dutch producer in Holland. I am always down because I write all the time. And I've been in bands, and I've been just a ghost. And I have not opposed to, like, I actually did a project with this band from New York City called Lonnie Claire, and I was like a member of the band. And I'm not opposed to like joining a one-off band or one-off project or being a, you know, co-producer or co-writer on stuff, because I just like to write all the time, and I have so much stuff, and like maybe some of my stuff works. So you never know. It's like, so he always hit me up.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And especially when I'm going for like those different sounds, you know, the different the keyboard sounds and stuff. I was so impressed on our previous conversation off air about just your knowledge of keyboards and sounds and the iconic sounds that are caught in different songs throughout the ages or throughout the last, you know, couple decades.
Yeah, that's my obsession, is like music history. I mean, I was watching a documentary on the history of Roland. This guy in England did this YouTube documentary, like that tracked every single Roland keyboard from the birth of the company.
Oh my!
And
God.
I just, you know, my wife was like, "What is that?" It's like,
how can you spend so much time?
Do you want to watch it? My wife was like, "Do you think I'm going to watch that?" I was like, "Well, I guess not."
I got a funny story for you. So my wife and I, right? I love U.S. history. I'm a huge Civil War buff and a World War II buff, and I don't know. That was something I loved enjoying. And when my wife and I got married, she's like, "Can you put on another one of those Civil War documentaries so I can fall asleep easier?"
Yeah,
that's what I knew. I was like, "I'm marrying you, girl," because our weaknesses and strengths certainly cancel each other out. So it's very
yeah. I know how to put people to sleep.
Anyways, all right, Phantom. Hey, thank you so much. I'm just very grateful for the time and making a new friend. So
yeah, it's great. Yeah, we'll be in touch, because I'm sure we can get this online concert. I'd like to see, you know, from Kaua'i, is what you could put together.
I would love to be a part of that.
Cool. We'll be in touch. I'll talk to you and John about that.
Okay, sounds good.
Great. Okay, bye.
Shoots. Aloha.
Bye.